previously worked for Sage, so I think everybody probably on this call would have heard of Sage. It was 18, 19 years in various different roles, working with accountants, working with bookkeepers, working with customers and partners, all around helping them improve their finance processes, and in particular, especially the last few years, around automation. So 2 years now with Quadient's AP, and as I say, my goal really in life is, part of my role is I do a lot of the onboarding and accreditation, similar to Gary, for anybody joining Quadient, along with customers and partners as well, work with the product teams, and really with our customers on how best we can help them automate some of their manual tasks. That's key for me.
Great. Well, you mentioned automation. That's sort of central to what we're discussing today. So before we carry on with this discussion, I just want to wake up the audience a bit. We've got a quick poll for you out there. Meg is in the background at IFOL. If she can just pop it up on the screen. There we go. Where are you on your accounts payable automation journey? Just one answer from you all, please. Have not started, you have investigated it, you have started, or we are fully automated. So where are you on your accounts payable automation journey? Again, just one answer, please. You have not started, you have investigated it, you have started, or we are fully automated. I'll just give you a couple of seconds just to have a little think about that. Meg, if we can pop up the results of that poll on the screen now. So 14% haven't started, 29% have investigated it, 29% have started, and 29% are fully automated. So it's pretty even across the board. Gents, just what do you think? Does that surprise you? Is that what you were expecting? What do you think? Warren, if we can start with you.
Yeah, look, I think it's that I pretty much expected that. Again, this is what we find on a day-to-day basis. It's a very mixed bag right now, with the way everybody is in that process. I think over the past couple of years, with what's happened, just in general day-to-day life with the remote working and the COVID piece, I think a lot of companies have looked into the processes. So that investigation piece and maybe start along that journey. That's good news. The surprising thing for me is the ones where the 29% fully automated. That's from what we're hearing in the market. I didn't think as many people will be as far along, but that's good news. It's good to hear.
What about you, Gary?
Yeah, like Warren, I'm not really surprised at the percentages. I mean, if you look at have not started and have investigated, you're about 43% of the respondents. So you're nearly getting up to about 50% really of organisations where they haven't, or they're investigating getting going. And as Warren said, there have been issues with obviously the COVID, the lockdown, and cost of living increases and everything that's affecting businesses now. Money's tight. But as we'll look at later on, obviously in our webinar this morning, it's really important to really look at how you can actually get to fully automated to improve your processes, and also support your supplier base, which is really important just now. But we'll obviously touch on that a little bit later.
Okay, thanks for that. And we'll have another poll for the audience a bit later on in this discussion. So let's look at some of this research I mentioned earlier. The report itself isn't out yet. You'll be able to see it in the new year. So these are just the initial findings. If we start with our first key priority, which is around process improvement, and I guess that touches on that poll we've just looked at, because the first piece of research we conducted in 2022 focused on AP processes. It revealed that 40% of respondents felt their processes were inadequate, with key pain points in invoice approvals, purchase orders, and invoice processing. Gary, if we start with you this time, I mean, just coming off the back of that poll, does that high number surprise you? Does it worry you that 40% of respondents felt their processes were inadequate?
I'm not surprised at the percentage, and I think it's disappointing that it's that high. I think, obviously, if you've got issues with invoice approvals, purchase orders and processing, that's going to lead to bad performance in terms of your paying performance and how you're supporting those suppliers. many organizations, particularly just now where we've got these difficulties that businesses are facing, it's really, really important that your supplier base is paid as quickly as possible. So you should be checking your KPIs and your performances in terms of what percentage are you paying your suppliers within the agreed terms, for example. So, you know, obviously, if you're identifying those pain points, it's really, really important that you start to look at doing something about it and how you can improve that. So, I mean, obviously, moving to automation, as we've just spoken about, is a key thing there. But also on the back of that is how are you actually using your processes and procedures within your organization? Have you got a centralized accounts payable function, for example? Are you using, is it paper-based still? Is your invoices going into multiple locations in your organization? Maybe look at centralizing that, getting a centralized AP team in where your expertise will sit and help drive forward those changes before you even possibly look at bringing in automation. So there's a few steps that you need to take before you even get to that automation phase. And that's one of the things that I did in my council when I was there when we had our transformation project. It was really just looking at how we were working to start with and getting to where you want to get to it is the automation stage, but there are gradual steps you need to take before that. There will be pain points. You know, you will have, if you're moving to new ways of working, you will build up workloads, but you've got to have a bit of pain before you get those gains. So I think initially it's just looking at how you're working and how your processes are across the organization and where you can improve them. Sometimes little gains can mean you can move forward in a lot of other areas.
I think there's a lot there that we'll touch on as we go through the discussion and unpack it a bit more. But Warren, I mean, I think there's a bit of deja vu. These figures are pretty similar to last year's research. This year's study showed that fewer than half of finance teams regularly review their process throughout the year. I just wonder, why do you think progress in this area is so slow, or appears to be so slow?
Yeah, I think it's about prioritization, isn't it? Really, when you look at in any business, you're looking at process and you're thinking, what should I be doing first? And you know, we've done a lot of research in the market as well, and you know, we're speaking to businesses every day of all sizes, through small, medium businesses, all the way up to enterprise. What we're finding, especially in accounts payable, and I think this is why the numbers are quite high, because somebody who, especially in small to medium businesses, someone who deals with accounts payable, it's not their only job. They've got a whole host of other tasks that they're having to do each day, as well as accounts payable. But what tends to happen is the accounts payable piece, like the saying in that question around the approvals in the entering of the information, is taking up a huge chunk of time, and it's taking them away from other high priority tasks. So it's trying to find that balance between, I need to make a change, but when do I have the time to do it? And how do I do it? And what's involved in doing that? And does it mean downtime? In some of those, you know, answers to those questions might surprise people, and we'll come on to that as we go through, around how easy it actually can be, because that's the key thing. Nobody likes change. You know, everybody's, you know, if things are working or they seem to be working, there's a bit of reluctance there. But I know from experience, once people have changed and they've reviewed that process and moved on, and as Gary says, even some of those little wins, you look back and think, why didn't I do this earlier? Why didn't I, you know, make that change, you know, a couple of years ago, and think where we could be now? So that's the way I look at it right now.
So AP leaders have a key role to play, don't they? I think from what you're saying in helping staff juggle those different jobs that you say they're doing. I just wonder, what do you think AP leaders should be focusing on to make sure their processes are in future being rated by staff, not just as adequate, but as good or great? I mean, who wants to sort of pick up on that one?
I think Warren touched on it, that I mean, in my experience across my organization, we had about 11,700 employees at the time when we started our transformation project. Now there was about 1,000 staff who were involved in ordering goods and services, and you had about 800 to 900 staff who were dealing with invoices. Now, some of that dealing with invoices might have only been about 1 or 2% of their job. So they might get 1 or 2 invoices in a week or a month even. So those tended to be low priority. They would sit on somebody's desk for a while until they had the time to get to it. So what we had to do first of all was look at every single person that was dealing with invoices and basically look at what percentage of their time that they were involved in processing of invoices. So we made it a 50, if it was above 50%, we then looked at those people as being those that we could then pull in to a central accounts payable team, because they were doing more than 50% of their job. So they would have some expertise around that. Whereas those below 50%, we could take that work away, and those staff could then be used for other important areas of work within their own department, might be education, social work, or whatever. So that was a starting point for us. And I think that was the catalyst really for us to get moving in terms of how we were our new ways of working, because we brought in a centralized team, and then behind that we then brought in a workflow system so that we could move our invoices around rather than pieces of paper. It was electronically transferred to requisitioners and that sort of thing. So we started at that point in terms of how people were actually working within the organization in terms of percentage of time processing their invoices.
Yeah.
So just before we move on to our next priority, Warren, what do you think AP leaders should be focusing on? I mean, they want staff to be saying the processes are adequate or good or great, not inadequate. So what do they need to do?
I think, look, there's two things on there, just touching on Gary's point. There is within the AP world, there's things that get missed, that get left, and that doesn't get dealt with this maybe as efficiently as it should do. So one, AP leaders need to be looking at, and I mean, there's only one answer to the question of how important is cash flow to your business, and that's very important. There's no getting around that, because without the cash flow, business doesn't survive. But also, I think that reassurance to the staff, and to their people, that improving processes doesn't mean getting rid of people. It doesn't mean, right, I'm out of a job because automation's coming in or a robot's going to do my job for me. That's not the case, and that's never going to be the case. Even with automation, it still needs human intervention. But the human intervention is at the points of where a human should be getting involved, rather than some of the mundane tasks that they're thinking, right, actually, that's not really important to do, or I'll leave that till later on in the day. Them are tasks that can be taken care of and only get you involved when you need to. So anybody, approaching the leaders, the leaders need to be open to those ideas and those changes, because they are only going to benefit the business in the long run.
We can talk a bit more, I think, now about that idea of the fear factor and keeping staff on board of any changes, because the next piece of research is around leadership strategy. It showed nearly 70% of finance leaders do have a clear strategy, so clearly that's a good finding. But the survey also uncovered a lack of focus on training, and training was something that AP teams told us they need more of. So our second key priority for 2023 is clearly more training. I imagine there are people listening to this discussion now who might be thinking about future training programs for their AP team. What training do you think they need to focus on in 2023? Gary, do you want to start off with this?
Well, singing from our hymn sheet, I suppose, IFOL, we are focused on training AP professionals, and we're working on extending our exam content for foundation and managers and other areas. So, I mean, when I started managing AP in my organization back in 2007, we had nothing like this. We AP staff were looked at pretty well the bottom end of the finance team, people that just basically bashed in numbers off of invoices onto the system, and that was how they were looked at. Things have changed so much now with automation coming in, technology, etc., etc. It's not just a case of putting in numbers from an invoice now. You've got to be aware of a lot more things, and training is key. I think if you get a team of trained AP professionals, then your ways of working, your efficiencies will all improve, because they will be very switched on in terms of what's happening within the AP industry. And organisations like ourselves keep everybody informed of any new ways of working, any, things like fraud, which we'll touch on later, any new frauds that are coming about. So there's a lot of networking now that's available to AP teams for training and for knowledge improvement, and that can only be a good thing for AP managers to try and encourage their teams to take qualifications and get recognised in the industry.
Gary, you mentioned fraud there. We have had a question here about fraud. We're going to come on to fraud in a moment, because that's another sort of key priority for 2023. But just leading on from what you said about what training AP leaders need to focus on for 2023, moving on from that, Warren, do you think training in automation should be top of the list, or is it something else?
No, I think them two can come hand in hand, to be perfectly honest. And I think, I'm gonna go from a selfish point of view here, and obviously I'm gonna talk about, some of the things that we do with Quadient's AP, the beamwork solution that we have around AP automation. Through our research, and obviously with people like myself that they help, we're talking about, like myself and Gary, we're very focused on those training needs, those analysis, and we know that you can't do a job unless you're fully trained. So part of onboarding journeys and things with our automation software, training is a key focus on that, in making sure that, one, everybody knows how to use the platform and the system. I think that's, without that, you're not going to get the best out of a piece of software. But two, understanding things like best practice as well. So, learning from other people, a lot of businesses and companies who have already been on this journey, and what have they done, and how has that improved their day-to-day AP workflows, finances, the approval workflows, what, the reduction in the manual time spent. So we've got a lot that we can share around that. Not like, obviously Gary's side of things is around that accreditation route, but ours as well. We looking at from the the business to business side of things, and what are other companies doing? How are they getting the best out of it? So it's really, really important that you're learning that as well as the automation.
Staff clearly want more training, and as with some of our other research, we've had similar findings in previous years. So what's the problem? Is it the cost? Is it just too expensive to train staff? Is there problems with company culture? What do you think the things are that are holding people back?
Could be a bit of both, and also time. I mean, obviously staff will need some time to do training courses. Okay, some may well do it in their own time at home or whatever, but others may be trying to do that as part of the training programs within their appraisal system or whatever. So time is an issue. You take a member of staff away from a busy AP team for an hour or 2 hours, that's a big loss in terms of what you're trying to do day to day. So there's a little bit of that. Cost could be a factor, obviously. Just now, businesses are finding that it's a pinch just now in terms of cash flow, etc. That could be an issue. So it could be just a combination of factors, but it shouldn't be a barrier to actually trying to improve your AP teams in terms of their knowledge and experience and getting accreditation at the end of the day.
I think Gary touched on it before as well. Sorry, Catherine.
No, Warren, I was just going to ask what you thought about it as well.
Yeah, I mean, Gary touched on it right at the beginning. In and around, in order to make changes, sometimes there's little bumps in the road. Sometimes you've got to give a little to be able to get something back. And I think this is one of the most crucial parts of it, is making sure that your staff have the knowledge and have the training. Yes, you might have a little bit of downtime up front, but you will get that back tenfold further down the road. So it is important to invest that time with your people, with your staff. And again, me and Gary are going to be on my soapboxes about training all day long, because this is our bread and butter. This is what we do. But it's so important. Make sure, and that's how you keep your staff as well. It's how you retain your staff. It's really, really important part. But time is always going to be a factor. It's always going to be a factor. So there's never going to be a good time. So you need to just make that time. That's the advice I would give. I know it's not as easy. It's easier said than done, but that's just true to the fact that you need to make the time.
Let's talk a bit more in depth, I think, about automation now. It's been sort of the thread throughout this from the beginning with our poll, because it is the thing that's discussed time and again when we're looking at AP processes. And if we look at our research findings, the annual automation trends shows that 67% of AP teams are still manually keying in invoices. I wondered actually if you can explain, why is it a bad thing? Why shouldn't people manually key in invoices? Warren, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'll go with that one. Look, it's not necessarily that they shouldn't do it. You know, there's always going to be times when that might be needed. It's looking at what's the best use of my time. So if I'm working AP and I'm, you know, in a busy environment, is doing data entry and manually keying in information into a finance system, is that the best use of your time? What else could you be doing during that time? You know, where could you be putting your skills, the things that you've learned over the years, the things you went to college, university for, the things you've had 20 years experience in doing, is manually keying invoices, you know, a key part of that. These are some of the tasks where you can get automation in and where you can get some sort of machine learning in to take that burden away from you, but still have that control as well. And I think that sometimes is the fear factor of letting something else or someone else or, you know, a piece of software do that for you. I lose a bit of control on that. If that's not the case, you're still controlling it. You're just letting the data entry part being taken care of for you. So I think that's why, you know, you've got to look at what else could you be doing? Like Gary said, could I be putting people in somewhere in a more important role or higher value role instead of doing that data entry?
So, I mean, that's part of the incentive then, do you think, for doing it? Because obviously, as with training, if you change your process and systems, it comes with a cost implication. So is the incentive for doing it is actually you could be helping your company grow in the future because staff could be doing something perhaps more worthwhile.
Yeah, exactly that. Because you know, it's not about necessarily always about cutting costs. It's about how can you drive and improve efficiencies to allow you to expand as a business, to allow you to take on more, have more customers, and in turn have more suppliers, and, you know, order more from your suppliers and have that, you know, more money coming through the door. And, you know, that in order to survive in business, you have to grow. You know, you can't stay steady all the time. Yes, you'll get through a few years, but you need to continue to grow and change and adapt to the market.
So at the start of this, Gary, I think your first answer, you sort of listed a lot of AP process changes that you went through in Aberdeen. So if somebody comes to you and says, you know, I want to increase automation, where should they start? What processes should they be looking at? And the other thing, of course, is how long does that then take to implement?
Yeah, well, as I said at the start, I mean, we had a full transformation project, so we had to look at where we were at the current time and where we wanted to get to, and what were the steps in between that. So for me, it was looking at how we were receiving our invoices, where they were getting processed across the organization. And the move was to centralize that, as I spoke about, the 50% element of people's jobs. So that was the first part. Fortunately for me at that time, we were bringing in a workflow system, and they identified AP as a prime area where they could use workflow to get invoices around the organization. So we worked in tandem, bringing in the centralized team, bringing in the workflow for the invoices so that we could get them around the organization. So that was the first 2 points that we delivered. Once we got that embedded into the organization, we were then in a really good place to be able to then look at the next phase, which was to bring in automation. Now, at that time, it was OCR, optical character recognition. So we brought that in first, and then we moved to an automation from our mainframe supplier. We're able to bolt on an automation platform that was allowing us to bring our invoices directly in electronically and feed those into our finance system. That saved me a bit of time. We had to go out to tender because there was a cost element, obviously. But for me, we went for our provider because it would have delivered the project quicker than maybe bringing in another organization, another supplier, where there may be glitches or things that didn't work. It would maybe delay things. So we were able to bring in, from the point of view of getting a supplier on board, bringing in our software supplier, it was about 12 months from start to finish before we started bringing our first electronic invoice, which wasn't too bad a time scale for us. There was a lot of testing obviously involved before that, but we were able to bring our first invoices in within about 12 months.
So perhaps at this point, it might be good to touch on what we mentioned earlier about the fear factor, the impact on staff.
Yeah.
How do you deal with those people who are fearful of change? It could be for a variety of reasons. They could be working at home. They could be comfortable with the system they're using. They might think that automation means they're losing their job. What advice would you have to AP leaders listening now? How do you bring those people with you when you want to implement change? Warren, do you want to kick off on this?
Yeah, look, I think just on that point there, the people working from home, this is probably one of the key reasons that businesses are looking at it, improving that process and changing those processes because of that hybrid working environment. Now, so many businesses and companies have relied on, being in an office and having, relying on a server and, having access to that where it can only be confined to one space and one area. That remote working and that cloud technology allows people to be much more efficient in the way they work, much more flexible in the way that they work. So I think for AP managers and AP leaders, it's pushing across that idea and that, that way of working, that we can continue to do this, continue to work like this and have this flexible working environment. And now more and more people who are looking at roles and looking at jobs, they look for that as part of the job description, ability to remotely work, because we're so used to it now that we've been doing it for so long that, you don't want to go back to that every day in the office if you can work from home. So
yeah.
Gary, briefly, what
I was just going to jump in there and say that within about 18 months to 2 years of us bringing in our automation, I was then able to look at allowing staff to work from home 2 to 3 days a week. That's not something I could have done with the manual setup. That was a big positive to a lot of the staff. Some of them had childcare arrangements. So for me, it wouldn't bother me if they worked from 12 midnight till 7 in the morning, as long as they got there, because it's a transactional type. Yeah. Basically, you can see what they're actually processing or dealing with. Because let's not get away from it. With automation, you will still have an element of keying in information, dealing with mismatched invoices that aren't going to go through first time. So there's still a lot of that requirement. We're not going to get away from manual keying at all. There's still a percentage of it.
Before we move away from automation, we've got a question here from Tom Herbert. Do you think automating the accounts payable process is a luxury only big companies can afford? Warren, you're shaking. Well, both of you are shaking.
Yeah, not one bit. I think it might be, to be honest with you, I think it might be more the other way around. I know, obviously, with what Gary's done there, it's a huge scale project there. So the larger the organization, the bigger the project, the longer it's going to take. You don't need to be a mathematician to work that one out, but it's important to do that in large businesses and enterprise businesses, public sector, private sector, wherever. But we are finding a lot more small and medium businesses are looking at automation as well. And it's not, I wouldn't say it as a luxury, me personally, through all the years. And that, obviously I'm going to speak with my Quadian head on, I think it's necessary. And this is before we even looked at AP. I think automation is necessary now for businesses of all sizes, because this is the way things are going, and everybody will get on board at some point. You don't really want to be left behind. That's probably key for me, is making sure that you're on the journey. And it's by no means a luxury, and it's not as expensive as people may look at and think. It is more cost effective than maybe you think it is.
Gary, you were shaking your head there. Do you agree with that?
I think it's all relative. I think if you're a small organization, you might only have 2 people in your AP team, but they might be dealing with 600-700 invoices a month. Invoices per person, that's still quite high. Bringing in an automation process will be a big help. And maybe for smaller organizations, as Warren touched on, we dealt with 250,000 invoices a year, and we were dealing with 8 different departmental organizations across the, like education, social work, housing, and all that type of thing. So it was a big project. Smaller organizations, you can probably look at your setup and bring in your automation much quicker, because you don't have that scale to look at. And also speak to your finance software provider like we did. They may have a bolt-on that can bring in OCR or e-invoicing for you quite quickly. And most suppliers as well are now geared up to provide invoices electronically, so they would be able to supply those invoices in whatever format you wanted as well.
Well, thanks for that. That was a very comprehensive answer for our questioner. Before we move on, we're going to have another quick poll. So Meg is in the background, if she can pop it up on the screen. The question is, following this webinar, what are your next steps? Just one answer, please. We will be reviewing our processes. We will investigate automation options. Happy with what we have. So the question again is, following this webinar, what are your next steps? We will be reviewing our processes. We will investigate automation options. Happy with what we have. So again, I'll give you a couple of seconds just to take a look at that. And Meg, if we've had the results in, if you want to put it up on the screen. So following this webinar, what are your next steps? 27% will be reviewing the processes. 45% will investigate automation options. 27% happy with what we have. So majority there, either reviewing processes or investigating automation options. So you must be just smiling there, Warren. I think you're quite pleased with that, I imagine.
I think that's again, this is what we're finding now is more businesses are starting to have a little look around and looking at the current processes and saying, is there any ways to improve? And I think, like Gary touched on it before, depending on the size of the organization, depending on what the job is, in some of the smaller, medium-sized businesses, your AP clerk or AP specialist is also your AR specialist. It's also your credit controller, is also doing some of the wages, so their time is really valuable. So if you can automate some of their tasks and give them a bit of time back, and they'll be so grateful for that.
And I've got a question here, if we can just deal with it quickly, from Tom Herbert, because it's along the same issue. Do you think remote working has been a key factor for finance teams to move to automation? Gary, you sort of touched on this earlier. Do you think it has? Remote working has been a key factor?
I definitely think it has. Yeah, I think the new ways of working through the lockdown periods, etc., was a driver for that, and it had to happen. Obviously, you couldn't get staff into the central office to do to work, so you had to look at ways in which you could get staff working remotely. AP is a prime area for remote working, as I touched on earlier with myself when we had our teams working from home. It was a no-brainer, to be honest with you. And I think, automation is a big driver to allow home working or remote working to happen.
Great, thank you. Let's turn our attention to the final piece of research, which focuses on fraud prevention. Sadly, fraud is still a big problem. Clearly, it's another big priority for 2023. Our survey revealed that fraud in AP is on the rise, with a whopping 44% of participants knowing someone who has been a victim of fraud. I want to start off with a question we've got from someone in the audience, from Alejandro Fernandez, who says, as you may know, there are several automation initiatives in place in several companies. How can we prevent fraud? As per my understanding, less human control can lead to more frauds, which might be counterintuitive, but I wonder if you agree with that.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that. It depends. It depends on what touch points that humans do have in these processes. And one of the key factors for me, when you look at AP automation, the purpose behind all of this would twofold, really. One, give some time back by reducing those manual errors, but two, even with machine learning, with OCR technology, as Gary touched on, what you're doing is you're dealing with these invoices prior to them hitting your finance system. And what's so important about that is once it's in your finance system, it's very, very hard to then find errors, problems, issues. And these normally come about once you've submitted a VAT return or once you've submitted your year-end report. It's not quite right, or when you've been audited. And you've got to go back and you've got to try and find where was the problem, where's the duplicate invoice or the fraudulent invoice. With AP software and AP automation, you've got a piece of software that sits in front of your finance system. The OCR technology takes care of the manual data entry, but before that invoice or the data or anything gets put into your finance system, it's either got to go through an approval workflow, or it's got to be okay to check by somebody within the organization. And that's the critical point for me is, you're checking it before it hits the finance system. Now, machine learning and AI and technology now is really, really clever. And it's clever enough to be able to notice duplications, invoices that aren't in the correct format, invoices from suppliers who you don't actually have in your records. So all of these things will be flagged in an AP automation system for an individual to take care of before it affects a ledger, before it hits a finance system, before it affects a VAT report or a year-end report. So for me, this is where automation could be critical to preventing fraud.
What do you think, Gary? I mean, what can people do Warren touched on there what people can do. What do you think people can do to reduce the risk?
I totally agree with what Warren said. And what we actually did was we brought in some forensic software which sat aside our AP function. And as Warren said, we checked everything before it hit the ledger and was ready for payment. So before our bank runs, we could run the software which would check for duplicate payments. It would check for any irregular, maybe invoices being paid to a supplier. There might be a spike where they've been paid £100 a month, and then all of a sudden you've got a £10,000 one in there. You can highlight things like that. Bank changes as well. If there's a change of bank on it can do a whole raft of things. So we would run a report before a payment run. We could be paying 4,000 or 5,000 suppliers in one payment run, but we would have a report there which would flag any that looked suspicious. So my supervisor would just give a quick check through. If it did look suspicious, all we do is take it out of the payment run, look at it and pop it back in. If we couldn't do that in the same day, it would go into the next day's payment run. But it was a safety net for us. And particularly if you're going through, you're looking at changing your processes and procedures, you're bringing in new technology, to have something sitting there as a safety net is a big plus. It gives you a lot of comfort in terms of what you're paying out and what you're doing, because fraudsters will pick up on organizations that are bringing in new software or whatever. They'll see weaknesses, so they'll try and put invoices in whilst you're going through all that change. So having that forensic software is a great safety net and support for you, and that's what we brought in.
Thank you. So before we finish, I just want to pull a virtual Christmas cracker. And inside that cracker is one key piece of advice for AP leaders going into 2023. What is it? What would you advise them to do, that key piece of advice? Who wants to kick off?
I've always been a big advocate for supporting your supplier base. Being in local authority, we had to support our suppliers. We had a requirement to pay within 30 days. A lot of our suppliers were local businesses, small to medium enterprises, who also had other local businesses supplying them as subcontractors. So it was really, really important for me to make sure that those suppliers were getting paid on time. And especially just now, and what we're going through, with the difficult times that we've got in the economy. So cash flow is really, really important to these businesses. So make sure you're supporting your suppliers. And on the back of that, that means looking at how you're doing your business through AP. Can you be more effective and efficient in different areas?
What would your key piece of advice be, Warren?
Yeah, for me, it's embrace change. I think that's a big factor. And that's, I could say that on any subject, not just accounts payable, accounts receivable or anything. I would say embrace change, because change, I'd say 99% of the time, change can be a good thing. And that's the way you've got to look at it. And, have a look at automation. I'd obviously, I'd put my Quadient hat on and say, come and have a look at Quadient AP. That's what I'm always going to say, because that's to employ. But there's, anywhere you look, if you look at AP automation, you're not tying yourself into anything by just having a look. It's like, going to a car dealership, you're interested in a new car. Just because you walk through the door doesn't mean you've got to buy a car, but you can have a look and see what's out there. Once you see what's out there and you see what it can do, get those no obligation demonstrations, take them up on their offers and let them see how it can work. And you'll be surprised with, one, how much you can do, and two, how quickly something like this can be implemented.
Well, I've seen
I can just touch on one thing.
Yes,
sorry, Kath,
carry
just
on.
one last thing is I'll touch on what Warren's saying, embracing change. Absolutely 100% agree. But make sure that you've got the buy-in from the very top to support that change moving forward, because I was fortunate that my director was fully embracing what I was doing, and you will get some resistance if it's a big organization for change. But if you've got that buy-in at the top, that makes your job a lot easier moving forward. And keep communicating with staff on what's happening. They need to know how that change is going to be affecting them moving forward.
Well, as you were both speaking there, we were getting a lot of thumbs up and clapping hands emojis climbing up the screen. So clearly you're saying the right things. Thank you both. Before we go, I just want to let you all know that the IFOL have got a new survey. It went live yesterday. It's called Digital Transformation Research Study. If you look at the Q&A now, you'll see a link is in there. If you take part, you also have a chance to win tickets to either the UK, Canada, or the US conference. So that's a pretty good incentive to take part, I would have thought. Thanks very much to you two gents today. Gary Stevens, Warren Moyer, thanks to you too for joining us. The research will be published in the new year. You can find it on the IFOL website with information on IFOL membership too. This webinar will also be available on the website too from tomorrow, so please share it. Thanks once again, gents. Goodbye from me and Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to all our members as well.
Yeah. All the best to everybody. Look at the timing as well. Perfect timing. And everybody gets 15 minutes before their next 12 o'clock meeting as well to go and grab a coffee and everything.
Thank you.
Thanks all.